If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. President Biden's sphere sovereignty. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. President Biden had his Abraham Kuyper moment this week when he stated about COVID, there is no federal solution. Without knowing it, he was citing the great Abraham Kuyper's idea of sphere sovereignty. I'll try to resist the very easy example of a politician not keeping a promise because this one is just too easy. During the presidential campaign, candidate Biden promised to shut down the virus, not the country. Abraham Kuyper. On the back cover of the book titled On Business and Economics, it explains that Abraham Kuyper was a leading Dutch figure in education, politics, and theology. He was a minister in the Dutch Reformed Church, was appointed to Parliament, and served as Prime Minister. Kuyper also founded the Free University in Amsterdam. He founded a political party, and he founded a denomination in addition to writing on a wide array of subjects. The AbrahamKuyper.com website simply reads, Abraham Kuyper was one of the most extraordinary individuals of his time, end quote. Joe Biden is a career politician. He's not a leader in education nor theology. He's not a minister. He did not found a university, a political party, nor a denomination. He's the very economic definition of a consumer who never hired an employee, never produced anything, but only redistributed what others produced. He seldom took a stand that he didn't later retreat from. This podcast is about one of those many retreats. But in this retreat, he may finally be stating something that is true. As the Wall Street Journal title quotes him as saying about COVID, there is no federal solution. Back to Abraham Kuyper. He's mostly known for the concept of common grace, but he's also known for our subject today, sphere sovereignty. Here's how he wrote it. If you allow society to be absorbed by the state, you will be putting the state in the place of God and destroying a divinely ordered, free society for the sake of the state. We Christians must uphold the view that state and society each has its own sphere. Each has its own sovereignty, and the social question cannot be properly resolved unless we respect this duality. See, this is the core of Abraham Kuyper's thinking. Further, from the introduction to the book that I just cited, quote, the idea that every sphere of society, including business, is charged with the ordinances of God and has the task of discerning them and acting on them was fundamental to Kuyper's social vision, end quote. Further, from that very good book titled On Economics and Business, it's a book about the history of Abraham Kuyper's writings. From that introduction, quote, each sphere of society has a fundamental moral purpose from its divinely endowed moral purpose rather than from any dictate from the state. Each sphere of society develops a free life of its own. Every sphere of society enjoys a certain freedom because its authority comes from God rather than from the state. Stay in your sphere. Yet perhaps the best known example of sphere sovereignty is when the Baptist pastors of Danbury, Connecticut, wrote to Thomas Jefferson, complaining that they were not allowed to preach because of a state church regulation. The same situation was true in neighboring Massachusetts, where the Congregational Church was the state church. Now, when the Baptist pastors appealed to Thomas Jefferson, he wrote them a letter stating famously, there should be a wall of separation between church and state. See, Thomas Jefferson was essentially stating Kuyper's idea about 100 years before Kuyper actually wrote it. Thomas Jefferson was clarifying that the state should not violate the sphere sovereignty of the church. Here's an example of sphere sovereignty confusion. Some years ago, a candidate for mayor of Dallas ran on a platform of improving education. The reason it's called Dallas Independent School District is because it is independent from the city control. Education is not in the sphere of the mayor's purview. Here's another one. Harvard's original mission statement was that every man should find Jesus Christ as his personal Savior. Well, of course, they ventured out of that sphere, and most recently, A Harvard alum shared with me that the university has hired actually a campus pastor who is an atheist. Okay, the point is, Harvard's sphere has changed. One of my favorite people to quote is Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America in 1832. He made many insightful comments about America in that generation. Perhaps the most quoted of those insights is his observation about associationalism. See, he noticed that in his home country of France and virtually every European country, problems were solved only by the monarch. But he noticed that in America, when people found a problem, they formed an association to solve it. Benjamin Franklin's first public library is just one example. See, today, Tocqueville will be impressed by the work of associations like Salvation Army, Red Cross, Samaritan's Purse, Rotary, Chamber of Commerce, and 100 other very effective associations that help solve human problems. Tocqueville would be sadly disappointed to see how the U.S. government has tried to solve so many of those problems. Our point today is that the government is violating their sphere. Another one, Ronald Reagan, maybe the last politician I've heard say anything like, quote, the government is not the solution to our problem, the government is the problem, end quote. Okay. Oh, and by the way, according to Thomas Sowell, writing in his book titled Wealth, Poverty, and Politics, Ronald Reagan is not the author of the trickle-down theory. No one is. According to Sowell, it's a straw man made up by progressives who want to tar conservatives as economists. There is no trickle-down theory. Yeah, I won't take time to make that case today that the Reagan economic plan is a direct descendant of the tax-cutting practices of John F. Kennedy. Okay, one more example before I go on of sphere violation. While traveling in West Texas last week, I noticed a billboard for Don Huffines running for governor of the state. It read, "Deport illegals." Okay, perhaps Mr. Huffines does not understand that people are not in Texas illegally. They're in the United States illegally. Deporting illegals is not in the sphere of the governor of Texas. Strategy. The other course I teach at Dallas Baptist University is strategic management. The most common mistake made by students is to misunderstand the level of analysis. See, the course is easily understood when students understand that there are essentially three levels of analysis: corporate, business, and functional. What we have in today's discussion about sphere sovereignty is a confusion of levels of analysis, just like we have in strategy. Or, as I've often quipped as a grandfather, it takes two people to make a child because it takes two to raise one. See, God had something in mind for each sphere of our world. And when we get it wrong, we violate what Abraham Kuyper called sphere sovereignty. The government. First, it's the government, not the government. The government has no money. One of our 9-year-old granddaughters commented this week, they say the COVID vaccine is free, but the government pays for it. Aha! So it's not free. Our 9-year-old granddaughter's right. As my co-author of Biblical Economic Policy, Sergei Sedamatov, likes to say, it can be provided for free, but it can't be produced for free. See, both Sergei and our granddaughter are quoting one of the most famous phrases in economics. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Milton Friedman even wrote a book on the topic. All right, here's some data. The U.S. GDP is about $23 trillion. The U.S. government forcibly takes about $3 trillion of that and redistributes it. At $3 trillion, the U.S. government would have the 6th highest GDP in the world. Do you understand what I'm saying? The U.S. government is bigger than the entire GDP of all but 5 countries. It's larger, the U.S. government is larger than the GDP of India, France, Italy, Canada, South Korea, and Russia. But the government has limits. As I pointed out in so many of these podcasts, the government has no money. It must take before it can give. There's a biblical command to give. There's no biblical command to take. The government should learn from President Biden this week when he accidentally quoted one of the most knowledgeable Christian theologians, Abraham Kuyper, about sphere sovereignty. Scriptural sphere sovereignty. The Bible has something to say about who should do what. See, the government's 10 highest expenditures are: number 1, unemployment benefits. In our book, Biblical Economic Policy, Sergei Sedamatov and I found 10 biblical commandments of economics. One that we refer to often is called work is good. Unemployment benefits discourage work, as I explained in podcast 95, titled Paying People Not to Work, and podcast number 80, Incentivizing Sloth. Number 2, the second highest expenditure of the U.S. government is Social Security. The Bible tells us that elder care is in the sphere sovereignty of churches and families. The third highest expenditure, Medicare and Medicaid. I've pointed out in podcast number 15, titled Health Care is Not a Moral Right, that government should not be doing that. The fourth largest expenditure of the U.S. government, national defense. This probably is in the sphere of government's purview. The fifth largest expenditure, this should shock you, is debt. The Bible has many warnings about debt, and I've unpacked the biblical view on this in podcast number 102, titled The Debt Ceiling, and number 8, titled simply The National Debt. The sixth largest expenditure of the federal government is housing. This is in the purview of the family and church. Sorry, I don't have time to unpack those details today. The seventh largest expenditure of the federal government is education. Look, pretty much all education was done by the church until the Protestant Reformation in 1517. While government does have a role, it's clear that people should have a choice to seek private or public education. I attempt to explain the Christian worldview of education in my podcast number 74, titled The Wall of Separation Between Education and State. The eighth largest expenditure of the federal government is called general government. Art Lindsley at the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics says, quote, government should punish evil but not do good. The church should do good but not punish evil, end quote. This expense for general government seems to be in the biblical sphere because we assume that the government is governing, which is their sphere. The ninth largest expenditure of the federal government, veterans benefits. As a part of national defense, it probably is in the government's sphere. And the 10th is transportation. This is probably in the government's sphere of sovereignty. Look, analyzing all the government's expenditures as scriptural or non-scriptural is more than a podcast. It's an entire book, and I'm not going to write that book today. Here's the point I'm making in this podcast. This week, President Biden stated that the U.S. government should return to its sphere of sovereignty relative to COVID. Let's pray he makes the same statement about other spheres in which the U.S. government violates its biblical sphere sovereignty. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time. For more information, please visit us online at davearnott.com. If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them online or in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.